All right, so in this video, we're going to be talking about the role of the Chinese Communist Party, the most important source of political power that exists within China. So it is one of the largest political parties in the world. It's been kind of overtaken, I think, by a right-wing party from India recently, but still one of the largest political parties in the world with about 90 million members. And it's important because it controls just about all the levers of power that exist within the Chinese government. So anytime you see a political institution in China, you generally have the CCP not far behind. Notable not just because of its own size, but also because of the size of kind of its youth league that exists, where it recruits members from. So the CCP has a really interesting and really important kind of recruiting mechanism that we'll talk about that it uses to recruit capable leaders kind of up through a hierarchical system. So they recruit leaders through the party system who ultimately sort of work their way up the system based on their contribution to the party, based on their local efforts, kind of in different parts of the country, and party leaders arise from the system, generally speaking. So within China, we have three parallel hierarchies that we've talked about: the political party itself, the army and the armed forces, and then the apparatuses, the institutions of the state. So one of the things that's important about kind of the party is that it dominates the other two kind of legs of the stool, where you have party control of the military and party control of the institutions of state. All right, so getting into the recruiting and the way in which the leaders within the party are chosen. So we have a concept that exists within the idea of communism called vanguardism, or sometimes democratic centralism. And it's the idea that society is best led by an elite vanguard party, kind of a small group of people that have the superior knowledge or the superior understanding of the people's will, or what the people need. So that's where kind of in the explanation from the CCP, that is where some of the legitimacy comes from, is through this sort of idea of having a small party represent the will of the people. So the way that this group is chosen, or the way that this group sort of works itself to the top of the pyramid, is through a hierarchical structure that extends not just into the whole national party, but into some of the local party, kind of local areas as well. So organized hierarchically within at the local level, kind of at the village level, and then up through the county and provincial level, and then into the national. So you'll see usually leaders within the country start their journey at the local level, at the village level, and kind of work their way up various jobs along the way. Okay, so getting into some of the important institutions within the CCP, we first have the National Party Congress. So unfortunately for teachers of comparative government, China has two things that can be abbreviated as the NPC, the National Party Congress and the National People's Congress, when we get into some of the official institutions of China. But the National Party Congress is important in that it is the sort of bottom of the pyramid when we're talking about the recruiting for national party leaders. So it meets about every 5 years, has over 2,000 delegates, and is kind of a place in which rubber stamps decisions are made. Kind of the decisions that the people at the top of the pyramid make are rubber stamped by everyone else. So kind of 2,000 people at the bottom, and then we work our way up to what's called the Central Committee. So they are elected when the National Party Congress meets. So they are sort of a group that, if you think about the way that Congress works, oftentimes they'll have like select committees of small groups. This is that same idea where you have kind of a smaller group of the 2,000 selected to meet annually and to carry out the business of the National Party Congress between sessions. So the way that I consider the National Party Congress, if you think of the way that conventions work in the United States, and the Democratic or the Republican National Convention, they meet every 4 years. They sort of signal to everyone who is gaining power, who is losing influence, who are some of the upcoming stars, what updates to the policy positions are, what is important to the party. That's sort of what we see here. So I would say the National Party Congress almost has more similarities to that than it does an actual functioning sort of legislative body, which it is not really. So, and then the central committee you see sort of stemming from that. All right, so then we whittle it way down to the Politburo. So the Politburo is that's where you actually start to have government policies developed in a big way. So they are chosen by the central committee, and they start to dictate government policy. So now you get it down to 25 people, usually men. I think at last check there were 24 men and one woman on the Politburo, and they meet kind of in secret. And then further up the pyramid you go to the standing committee of the Politburo. So from 25 down to 7. And this is where we really see the heart of policymaking take place within China. So these 7 members tend to also, or usually pretty much always are also important government officials in terms of they have the president, the premier, the vice president often is on this, although I don't think he is at this point. The vice premier, people, some other important party leaders from across the country, and essentially chosen by the Politburo, and they are some of the closest confidants to the general secretary of the CCP. So they are usually trusted members of the party that are in and around whoever the general secretary is. And then at the very top, you have the general secretary, Xi Jinping at this point, who is also the president, who is also in charge of the Central Military Commission. So you, like I said, kind of the inverted pyramid system of recruitment that you see that exists within the CCP. And it's really interesting to actually, you can do this with Xi Jinping. You can sort of track his rise through the CCP and sort of see all of the, along the way, sort of all of these steps. So here we see, I think this is the current Politburo. Xi Jinping, the director of the general office of the CCP, the vice premier, the premier, other sort of party people that we see here. All right, so thinking about how things actually function within the party. So the Chinese Communist Party is oftentimes the source of much confusion or consternation or mystery among people that are studying China. So there's a lot of connections that are made up. Guangxi is the word. Connections that are made kind of within the party. So generally speaking, you have a lot of really fiercely competitive factions that take place, and that are factions that arise within the party. So I would say these are kind of the traditional categories. So you have oftentimes the person who's in charge of the country will spend a lot of time building their sort of power base within the party. So right now, the current leader, Xi Jinping, is called a princeling, but he has some similar kind of people around him with the same sort of credentials that he has. And then former presidents like Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao have similarly had sort of groups of people that they sort of rose to power with that ultimately filled out the positions within the Politburo and within the standing committee of the Politburo, kind of during their presidency or time as general secretary. You also have some other interesting coalitions, kind of historically speaking, like kind of this debate or this conflict that took place as China started to creep towards political liberalization in the 80s, where you had kind of differences between conservatives and liberals. So that's sort of where that comes from. But nowadays, I would say you have more sort of intra-party squabbling and fighting and issues that arise from sort of personal bases of power within the party.